and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered.
We're here.
And we are going to start a new series. It's something new and it's something different. I think we're also going to explore, and we're also kind of figure out as we go. So firstly, have patience with us. Secondly, we also want to clarify, as we have previously on this podcast, that we are not here to kind of be Bible scholars or also kind of by any means say that we are professionals or know what we're talking about. We're literally just having a conversation that is raw, that it's like not premeditated. We talk a little bit beforehand just so we can kind of like get on the same page, or at least to kind of like start shooting some ideas. But it's not necessarily something that we have digested fully. And I hope that also this can, even for us, be something that ignites something, not just for you listening or watching, but also for us. Because we want to kind of go a little bit more Bible-based for some time and talk about some people in the Bible, and talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the things that normally we also don't talk about. You know, we also, all of us at some point have gone to church or are listening to sermons, and they always kind of follow a character. And I think most of the times they're limited. So, you know, limited in time, limited in perhaps even in what they can talk about. And so they choose very specific things and specific people to kind of talk about. And we want to kind of go along the same lines, but also talk about the things that perhaps we don't really pay attention to much. And that's why I'm saying also that I hope that this can be of an encouragement for us especially, but also for you to really want to go deeper, and not just like reading the Word of God to like get to know more about God, but also to like look at examples that you can also use as a reflection. Before we started this episode, I was praying, and I really feel that as something for us as well, that we can take these examples and actually see a reflection of us that can actually bring courage and excitement to know, okay, if God used these people, or if these people are being mentioned as well, that God can do something with me, especially right now when I don't think that God can do something with me, or in this state where like I don't feel like my utmost best or whatever, you know. I think that's exactly why these stories are there, so that they can actually bring courage, bring faith and hope as well for new things. So I hope that makes sense. We're going to talk about lots of different people. Some people that perhaps, you know, are going to be kind of obvious, and some people that are going to be like, really, controversial. My favorite. But today we're going to talk about Moses. Yeah, it's a good one. We thought we'd start, you know, with something a little bit more Sunday school, you know, to kind of get us pumped. But also because, it's in the beginning. I mean, sure, there's Adam and Eve, but that's too controversial. So we thought, let's start with something a bit more fluffy. So Moses, I think we all know Moses, kind of. We were reading a little bit just before starting, and like I realized that there's so much about Moses that I know because of the Prince of Egypt, like the movie.
Yeah, for real.
And that's pretty much it. That's all my
Deliver Us, or what's the song?
Yeah, exactly. And I love that movie. And actually last year I got to go to Egypt, which was really awesome. And that also became a lot more real. We also watched the movie in Egypt, which was cool. But there's a lot of things that actually, like, I think I just remained with like what I watched, and then that's it,
right? Yeah.
And the story, because I think the main focus is about the fact that Moses was this person that was saved from a persecution, and then he like rescued his people, and he delivered his people into the desert, and then his people sucked, and then because of that they were in the desert for like 40 years when they were only supposed to be there for a few days. And then they made it to like the place that they were always supposed to go to, which was the Promised Land. But sadly enough, Moses never made it because he was way too old, and also like too like messy. And that's it. That's the story that I've always kind of just like listened to.
Yeah.
And I think in church also we focus on that. But there's so much more also that like is in the in-between that we really like don't focus on. Like, for example, like him going to Midian. Wasn't it you? How long was he in Midian for?
He was there for, I think it's 40 years or something. He was there after he left Egypt and killed the Egyptian. He went away, and he lived there for 40 years. He got married. I think he had kids. No, surely. And lived there for 40 years as just a shepherd. He just watched the flock, and which you see again in Prince of Egypt. They don't show that it's 40 years though. At least like I didn't put that together as a kid.
He looks the same.
He
looks the exact same. Yeah, when he goes back, maybe a little more gray hair, but I don't think very much. But yeah, 40 years is a long time.
No. But it's crazy. I didn't actually put 2 and 2 together, but 40 years is how long he went out of Egypt.
In the wilderness.
And then 40 years is how long.
But something also I was reading is how it says that there's a verse in the very beginning that says something about how he was a shepherd and went near the Mount Sinai. Like it says it was in the wilderness with his sheep near Mount Sinai. So he spent those 40 years that he was like an outcast in Midian in the wilderness that he then took the Israelites through. So he spent like at least 80 years of his life in the wilderness. He was like very well rehearsed in the wilderness.
Wow, he was preparing himself before going to the wilderness.
Yeah, without even knowing.
Yeah.
He was like a shepherd in the wilderness of sheep, and then he was a shepherd of people.
Yeah.
In the same wilderness. In literally the same wilderness.
Anybody know that song?
No.
Oh.
What song?
In the desert. No?
Sorry.
Okay.
Is there any
You know
more
that
to
song?
the
Yeah.
song?
It's okay. We don't. It's fine. But anyways, it's just
Could be like
relevant
that
for
time
point.
Abby sang and we didn't know it till the last verse.
Oh, yeah. It's true. I still don't know that song, but I'm sorry.
She played
okay.
it though.
Yeah, I know, but like I don't know when. Anyways. But yeah, no, it's true. Like he was such a pro at being in the desert in many ways, and I think it's so crazy because I think I always look at Moses when he is in the desert dealing with all the complaints of everybody, thinking that he was just such a righteous man of God, and that's why he was like so focused on God, and all that they could care about was like the things that they were missing. But actually, sure, he was a man of God, but I'm sure he had insecurities. It's just that he had experiences, so he had grown on those.
Yeah.
But we don't normally focus on that, and I think that's kind of crazy. Like sometimes, I think that sometimes is how we look at leaders. We look at leaders and we're like, wow, like I could never do that.
Right. Yeah.
And it's true to an extent, but it's muscles that they've built because they've also walked the walk.
Yeah.
And I think I never really like approached that about Moses in that same way. He walked the walk. He walked literally 40 years before he walked those 40 years. And it's, I don't know, for me it's a bit crazy.
Yeah, it's also interesting that God used Mount Sinai, where he lived and like shepherded these sheep, and spent probably most of his time, if not like 80% of it, like a lot of his time was spent at the bottom of Mount Sinai, and that's actually where God brought him to, and spoke to him, and obviously then, everything happened. But like that God uses our common places, the place that we go to, the places that we live, like our inhabitants, he doesn't, of course, like in my eyes, I read that and I'm like, Mount Sinai must have been like some crazy mountain, like that everyone knew about. I mean, like probably people knew, but Moses was also just sitting at the bottom of it most of the time. It's like a very normal place for him that God used, which is really cool.
I think what's also crazy for me is like, I don't know, I picture myself as an Israelite following this guy who, like, I knew him as like the Pharaoh's son. There's air quotes happening because he was like adopted. He's Pharaoh's son, and then he kills someone, and then he runs away for 40 years. Don't see him. Then suddenly he comes back and he's like, come with me. Like he's like literally the equivalent of like the guy in the white van, being like, come with me, like, get in the van, like God's gonna let you go. Okay, like what do you mean? And so then all of a sudden all these plagues happen, and like it's all like not being led by the guy, it's being led by God, obviously. But if you have no concept of God at that time beyond like the God of your ancestors 400 years ago, you're just watching this guy act crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and then he's leading you through the wilderness. And I don't know, I guess I would be thinking like, what the heck does this guy know? Like, what does he know? I'm trusting him. I was always like, I would trust Moses because the pillar of fire is before him or whatever. So it'd be like, easy. The Israelites had it easy. They had the pillar of fire. They had manna falling. Like, it was easy to follow. But how, like, actually Moses was really trustworthy because he spent the time in the wilderness before.
Yeah.
He knew what he was doing in many ways. He knew what it was like to live off the land. He knew what it was like to take care of, like, his body so that he could last a long time. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know, in what you're saying about like leaders or things like that, I know that sometimes for me it can be really hard to trust. And I would have struggled to trust Moses. I think he might have had a stutter or something, I heard at one point. I don't know.
Yeah, that was a huge point.
He didn't have a great reputation, and now suddenly like all these weird things are happening and I'm leaving all the comfort I've ever known to follow him. But actually he was trustworthy, not only because God called him, but also because he had been prepared in the wilderness that whole time. Like, that's crazy, but the people didn't know that.
Yeah.
But he was actually trustworthy.
Yeah.
It's just really interesting.
I think also because the 40 years that happened after the 40 years he was before, I think it's like they weren't supposed to be 40 years, you know? So like,
it's supposed to be 40 days.
Exactly. So imagine like God is preparing you for something and you're
true.
like, God, why is it taking so long? 40 years in here. And God is like, because I'm preparing you for something else. Like, probably God didn't say that to him, but I'm preparing you for something else. So when God is promising, in 40 days you will be delivered or anything, it takes 40 years, and you're like trusting this person, as you were saying, this Moses, and you're like, but he said in 40 days we'll be free. And like, well, maybe they didn't know. I actually don't know if they know.
I don't know, but I think either way, like, maybe there was no expectation of time because no time was actually like promised, but still in your rationale, like, it's like, okay, we've now left Egypt, then that should be it. Surely. Like, we've already crossed the sea.
It's got to get better from here.
Like, we've just crossed a sea, and not only that, but then the sea just came down and crushed all of the soldiers who were chasing us behind, enough for all of us to be alive, but they died. Like, that's it. That's the miracle. Hooray. Like, literally, like, I think that's crazy sometimes to think that many times, like, we see this big miracle, things happen, and like, it's part of the promise, you know, but we're the ones who are like, we determine, and we're like, that was it, that was the promise, right, God? And when God's like, actually no, I've got better plans, different plans, something that's going to be even sweeter still, we're like, but that was a wow. Why can't that just be it? Yeah, exactly. That was enough. And why can't that just be it? And I think it's true. Yeah, like, that was a wow. Let's not forget that God did that. That was a miracle that they walked through. I watched a documentary not so long ago that showed like how deep it would go, and also like that they've found recently chariots, like, and proof of that, you know, and like also how crazy that is. So let's not forget that that is a miracle. But who are we to determine what miracle is enough, or when God is done, you know? And I think that's what brought that bitterness into the people of Israel, of like saying like, that's not what I signed up for. And many times I think that's a huge reflection on us as well. Like, that's not what we signed up for. And I think that's literally what happened with Miriam. Like, Miriam, for those of you who don't know, Miriam was Moses' older sister. Moses was actually the younger sibling of 3, right?
3 that we know of, I guess. Like,
I was going to say.
I would imagine probably there was more kids. There was a lot of
breeding.
Going on. You know what I mean? I mean, it even says that in the Bible. Like, Pharaoh's like, let's get rid of these people because they're breeding like crazy. No, he does. Like, literally, he says that. He's like, let's crack down because they're like multiplying like rabbits or something, and then that doesn't work. But
and
anyway,
I actually don't know anything about Moses' dad. Funny enough. But anyways,
I don't think it ever says anything about him.
This is crazy though, because you know how Pharaoh wanted to kill all of the kids, and then suddenly he received a 2-year-old or baby, whatever, into his house, and he still received it. Like, he sent to kill like all of them, and he still raised one that he sent to kill. Like, he didn't put the dots together that like it was one of the Jews, and like he raised him, and like
I think, but that's where you really see God like at work, because I think probably he put the dots together, but it was one of those things of like, but I'm Pharaoh, you know, and so
and also
like,
it was his daughter that found it. Like surely that also had something to do with it. Her being like, I want this baby, and I will have this baby.
Exactly. But
Whoa.
she sends him, which is not shown in the movie. So don't just follow the movie like I did. But she finds the baby and she returns the baby to the mother.
Yeah. That's not in the movie?
That's not in the movie. In the movie, like the last time that we see the mother was when she's like,
oh yeah, that's true.
That's the last time we see the mother.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and like we and then later on we find out through Miriam that she died.
Right.
Like, but like all he remembers is like the song, you know, that he.
Oh,
like,
in the
connects
movie.
to
I
in the
see.
movie.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No. Like it's good. Sunday school's good, but let's actually teach what really happens.
Yeah.
Or let's encourage people to read what really happens. But anyways, so Farah's daughter finds the baby, and then she takes it back to the actual mother and says, nurse him until he's old enough, and then she brings him back.
Well, Miriam follows him.
And then Miriam follows
Well,
him
Miriam
down.
like follows him there and just like sees the Pharaoh's daughter having the baby, and so she's like, I got a great idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's bring this baby home to mama, you know? So she's like, hey, I think she actually talks to her.
Yeah.
Doesn't she?
Yeah,
She's like, hey, I think like, I have someone that could take care of this baby.
Yeah, so should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I have an idea.
that's
I know
crazy,
someone.
you know?
Yeah.
Also, like not to take the feminist point of view, but it's incredible that her story is there,
No,
you
it's
know?
so
Like,
crazy.
especially when you look at the Bible and it's so male dominated, especially because of that time,
Yeah.
that like women's stories weren't like deemed as important.
Yeah.
When you look at this, and not only was she a woman, she was a child.
Little
Yeah.
girl.
She was a little girl. Like, oh, I'm getting chills. But like, she was a little
It's
girl
so
that God
true.
used,
Yeah.
and that her name has like remained here, and
Yeah.
like that is incredible. She was a huge part
Yeah.
of everything that happened
That's
to
so
the
true.
Israelites. That's incredible.
So true.
Yeah, and can you imagine Moses' mom who puts a baby in a river, like mourns the loss of her baby, never going to see that baby again.
Yeah.
And then suddenly gets a knock on her door from the Pharaoh, like the daughter of the Pharaoh or whatever,
Yeah.
saying, do you mind nursing this baby for me? Like, I just found it. And
Yeah.
it's her freaking baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Oh my
like,
gosh.
I would, like, my heart just would want to worship
Yeah.
God. Like,
Yeah.
you're kidding me. You brought
Yeah.
this baby back to me
Yeah.
for this time.
That shows God's goodness
Yeah.
into a whole
Yeah.
other level.
And also, like you
Yeah.
said, then not only did she like keep him for a day, she had him for like years.
Yeah.
Literally years that she was taking care of
and
her
I
son.
think
Yeah.
that's also one thing that we need to like also highlight, not forget that the killing of the babies wasn't just a one-off or like one day, like let's go wild and kill all the Jews, you know, like it wasn't like, it was a persecution that lasted for a while because it was like to kind of get rid of that. So for all of that time that the mother was nursing Moses, she was also still hiding the baby. So also how crazy that God would not only like protect the basket when Moses went through, you know, the river all the way through the river Nile, all the way down to Pharaoh's house, but also all of those years until he was old enough that he no longer needed to be nursed. And for a baby no longer to be needing to be nursed is at least like, well, I don't know, back then it was probably longer because to have a child be nursed meant that they didn't need like food from anywhere else except from the mother. So I would assume like up to at least 6.
I don't know, maybe.
This is wrong
Could
facts.
be.
I don't know. Google
I
it.
have no
I
clue.
don't know.
But like for 6 years, say for example, or at least let's say even 3 years.
Yeah.
Like that's still insane that like while every house is being searched, while every baby is being taken away, Moses is still being kept. There's actually a really good series, like it's a very short like docu-series that is on Netflix that has like 4 episodes and it's called Moses. And they actually show this. And like how every time they hid the baby and Moses wasn't crying or whatever. I mean, obviously none of that is in the Bible, but like it's still really, really crazy. And yeah, I never actually thought about Miriam and like how crazy
incredible.
it is that she.
And then she makes a comeback, and then it kind of that also gets interesting a little bit. But
So let's talk a little bit about that. So Miriam, older sister, really excited. She's actually the one who vouches for Moses when Moses comes back, and everybody's like, "But who's this dude?" She's like I can vouch for him. You know, Sandra Bullock does the voice in the movie. She's amazing. I love her. So she plays a great sister. But she's the one who like actually like defends Moses to the death. and she's actually the one who, like, she was also very well known. Like, she had, like, a lot of authority, you know? And so, and even amongst her people as well. And she's the one who vouched for Moses. But this is kind of what I wanted to talk about, because sometimes also, like, in the same way that we were saying earlier, like, that sometimes we look at our leaders and we're like, wow, like, how could they get to that point? We also have the other perspective, especially for us who have been in leadership for some time, or for us who, like, perhaps have a bit more awareness, wisdom, or whatever you want to call it. We look at some people and we think, like, they're not that worthy to be in that role, you know? Firstly, how crazy is it that, like, she needed to follow her baby brother? First of all, that she knew that her baby brother was, like, there was something on him, stamped on him from when she was little, which is why she also vouched for him and, like, she protected him and all that stuff. But also that she would, like, follow him as a younger as an older sibling. That's really humbling, you know? But also,
I mean, to be fair, probably in that time, like, it was a bit more normal because she was a woman. You know what I mean?
That's
and like he was a man. Like as much as it's like, surely in some way, like not trying to take away from your point, sure. But like for sure in some way, like it also felt normal. No, you know what I mean?
No, but even for the older brother.
Yeah, for Aaron.
For Aaron, like that was still also the same situation.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's also why, like, it's so important to also kind of continue to remember, like, what God did back then and to kind of keep coming back to that and renewing that, because when they were walking in the desert towards the promised land, they were the ones who gossiped about Moses and actually turned like against him, and
which is crazy,
which is so crazy. The ones who like vouched for him are the ones who now like talk against him, and she, because of that, became a leopard, like, and suffered because of that. So how crazy sometimes also about us, right? That we also, like, a reminder for us to keep humble, even when we think that, like, it is done or whatever, you know? Like, maybe she didn't picture, or Aaron didn't picture that it was Moses who was always going to deliver them. Yeah. But still, they needed to be faithful throughout the process.
Yeah, that's wild. Just, like, thinking of that dynamic, you know, the three of them. Like, that must have been so crazy for Aaron, especially, you know? Like the older brother, and like he wasn't really like part of the, like, was he really part of the plan at the beginning? Like, or did God like, I don't know, these are questions, you know, because obviously at the very beginning, like when God like speaks to Moses in the burning bush, it's like this is also really interesting to me. That whole scene is very interesting, but it's something that people talk about a lot, the burning bush. But like how, you know, God calls him and Moses is like, no, thank you. Sorry, I think you're thinking of the wrong person. And eventually, like, God, like, they go back and forth, you know? And, like, God kind of gives gives Aaron, like, as Moses for, like, as a crutch in a way, or, like, as a help, you know? Maybe crutch isn't the right word. But, like, okay, you're, like, nervous to do this on your own. You can, like, take Aaron with you. He's your brother. Like, you can do this with him. Like, I don't know. I imagine, like, what was that like for Aaron as well? Because, you know, he didn't hear that from God. You know, Moses heard it, and Moses delivered the message, which Moses delivered every message, you know, and Aaron kind of like got like roped in there, you know. So I don't know, like what that must have been like for him, you know.
Well, I think it's also like an interesting context is that they didn't have the Holy Spirit then, so they didn't have this connection to God's voice all the time, you know. So the fact that Moses could hear God and could have communication with God already was wild, you know, because at that time, like now we have a whole lot of people who are like, the Lord told me, God told me, you know, but at that time they didn't have connection with Holy Spirit in that way, you know what I mean?
Especially not after 400 years of slavery where they were like really distant from God and were like really angry, you know.
400 years of God not speaking to them, like that's in the Bible. It was 400 years that God didn't speak to them. And so now here they are with Moses like having these encounters with God. And it actually says that the Lord, sorry, I have the Bible here because I want to make sure what we're saying is legit. For those listening, so that like, not because we know, but so that also we can check ourselves, you know what I mean? Also because I find it really interesting. Exodus is my favorite book of the Bible. So I really find it interesting.
Yeah. At one point I saw you over there, like,
I'm like having crazy revelations. She's fact checking.
You know? It's good. You know, she's like the hacker, you know, and like in the movies, like I got into the mainframe.
But yeah, it says, which is something we can talk about later, because this is something I remember Abby asking me about. I don't know if you remember this, but
When God tries to kill Moses.
When God tries to kill Moses, yeah. So God tries to kill Moses, and then he doesn't, thank God. And it says, now the Lord said to Aaron. So actually Aaron got to hear the voice of the Lord as well. It says, go out into the wilderness to meet Moses. So God also spoke to Aaron, which we're like, that's cool. Like God said to Aaron. But at that time, God speaking wasn't, like at this point in time, the only person who had heard God's voice for 400 years was Moses.
Right.
And Moses sees a burning bush. And at this point, I don't even know that Aaron knows that Moses saw the burning bush.
No, because
he doesn't know.
Before he came back into
Egypt.
Egypt.
He was on his way there. Yeah, that's true.
So it says, now go out in the wilderness and meet Moses. So Moses went, and Aaron went and met Moses at the mountain of God and embraced him.
Wow.
So that's crazy. So Aaron's probably like, what is this voice? Like, what's happening? I'm hearing something from God, to go meet Moses, who then explains this whole vision that God gave him. And then Aaron's like, I'm in on this plan because I also just heard the voice of the Lord.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That is so crazy.
And again, in our context now, we're like, oh yeah, you hear God, I hear God, you hear God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in that context, they didn't have,
very different.
that had to have been an audible voice at that point, because they didn't have any other connection.
And for him to like literally go and do that, then it would have had to be something that he also recognized without recognizing, because he has no awareness, but recognize enough that it wasn't just his voice, that it was a voice from above.
Yeah.
And that also takes a lot of trust, but like, you know, like, but I think, it's crazy.
Also, what a huge confirmation for Moses, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I never really thought about that,
Yeah,
you know? That, like, Moses is, like, hearing, like, crazy stuff from God, you know? Like, not just, like, oh, I want you to, like, go and marry this woman. Like, whoa, we're going to send some plagues. You know, like, we're going to go crazy right now, you know? He's the only one that's hearing this. And then he's like, oh, like, God, I don't know if I can do it. And God's like, okay, Aaron will go with you. And then randomly he just runs into Aaron, you know? Aaron's like, hey, I heard God, you know? And he's like, oh my gosh, praise the Lord, because I thought I was doing this on my own, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. That's actually wild, you know?
Actually, like I saw this preaching or something, and this guy was describing the burning bush, not just like something that was on fire. It was something that came from heaven straight to the, like, and it says in the Bible, like, something that you can see from all around, you know? And like, he was like, I can't be the only one who saw this, you know? Like, how can God only be speaking to me? And it was something so big that, like, of course, like, in your mind, you're like, this has to be like a joke, you know? Like, I cannot speak this way. But it had to be something that, like, shook him so bad that he had to, like, okay, this is not just me, you know? Like,
yeah, of course.
It had to be something strong that, like, it will like shake everything inside of you. And I think it says that he was blind for 3 days after that, no?
Yeah, because the light was like really bright.
Yeah.
But like
fact check, Maddie.
Maddie?
I don't think so, but let me check. Keep talking.
But
I may be wrong.
It might be at a different part though, because there's the part where he also like speaks with God and then he's like glowing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's
That
what
the
you're
people
thinking.
were
Then he had
blind.
to shield his face because his face was so bright.
I completely
Yeah.
the
That's
stories.
right,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Fact
Yeah.
check. Hack the mainframe. Just kidding.
But I think also something that we forget about to like talk about. Well, actually, maybe we don't forget about it, but we talk about it. Maddie kind of mentioned it. You know, like he stuttered. You know, sometimes I'm sure that like for him that was frustrating.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that for those who are following him, that was even more frustrating.
Oof.
Yeah.
Good point.
I mean, probably not then. Because back then, I think they had a lot more patience.
I don't
but I
know.
think-
These Israelites, they were
I
not-
mean,
according to the
for
Bible.
sure. But like, I think back then, like, you know, there was nothing like to kind of turn away from. You know, there was no medicine, nothing that you would know that, like, you know, or like you would not, you would never second guess and be like, your parents didn't like raise you right. They didn't take you to
I
enough
see what
doctors.
you mean.
Do you know what I mean? Like, but I feel like now we kind of like judge a bit more, and I'm like, ugh, like,
I
that
don't
you
know
have a
though.
family,
I
but,
feel like surely though, still at the same time, they would have thought even maybe that it was like something spiritual, you know, like they were like, he's got some kind of like, you know, the lepers and
Yeah,
all
it's
that kind of
true.
stuff, like
Yeah.
unclean women, like they were got to go away. Like I wonder if
Yeah.
this, like if a stutter had any kind of connotation of that way. I don't know. They never mention it, so I have no idea. And I haven't
Yeah.
studied ancient
But
Israelite.
also, can you
laws.
imagine like somebody just getting on a giant rock to be like, I'm about to take you out of this, you know? And I'm not trying to like be mean
Yeah.
or anything, but
Yeah.
exactly.
it would be so difficult
It
for
would
me
be
to be like, I know,
painful.
I already don't know you, don't like you, don't know where you're going to take me, don't understand, don't trust, have all of my other issues because I've been in slavery for 400 years, and now I can't even understand you.
And let's not forget that like people knew who he was. He was a Jew who wasn't a Jew because he grew up with the Egyptians.
Yeah.
He was
Undeserved privilege.
Crazy.
A murderer. He
Yeah.
killed, which, you know, like, okay, fine. Like, I mean, I've never killed anyone, but like, still, like, I think back then it was looked a lot worse. I think now we even like are a bit more on the, I think on the defense. Now we look at that story and we're like, well, but he didn't really murder because he saved that man's life, you know? But like, we're sugarcoating it because we sugarcoat so many different things nowadays, you know? Like we are like self-defense, whatever. But like back then, that's how he was known, as a murderer. Like the reason why
that was the last time he was in Egypt was when he killed someone.
Exactly. The reason why he had to run away was because Pharaoh was going to kill him. So he had to wait for 40 years until Pharaoh was dead to come back to Egypt. And that's actually when he came back. But the way that he had left Egypt, the way that all of the people living in Egypt, all of the Israelites knew him as, was the murderer and the false person who was supposedly a Jew, but actually he wasn't, you know. So he really didn't have a lot of things going for him. Nothing really, but God used him.
I was just thinking as well, going back to the Aaron thing, like we don't know if at this point he hadn't seen Aaron for 40 years, you know, like he left also his family, he left everything he knew. And so for God to say like, because Moses is like, oh, I don't know about Aaron, or like, who's going to go with me? Who can help me? Cause I have a stutter and blah, blah, blah. And God's like, well, what about Aaron, the Levite? Like at this point, he hasn't seen Aaron for 40 years. At this point, he doesn't know if Aaron rejects him, if Aaron hates him, if Aaron loves him. And it says, I know, this is God saying, I know he speaks well. And look, he's on his way to meet you now. He will be delighted to see you. Like the healing that happened in Moses' heart. And then when Aaron sees Moses, it says that he embraced him. So in the middle of God calling Moses into this like crazy big plan and whatever, he also like was healing his heart and reconciling him to his family. Like how sweet that must have felt for Moses. Like, you're calling me into something really scary, but at the same time you're sending my brother who will be delighted to see me. Nobody would be delighted to see me. I murdered somebody. Like I would carry that. Like who from my past is going to be delighted to see me? But God says your brother, and then here comes Aaron, like you know, like that's just really sweet. I don't know. Like,
I think that sorry.
No, keep going.
I think that's so key. Like now that you're saying, I'm like, I think that was so key for him to like have that healing before he had to like go through all the process, because I don't think you can like lead people or like remain in God like with all that pain in your heart, you know. I think of course God had to do something first to like be able to like not just remain in God's love and the promises, but to remain in like what God was speaking to him, you know, like and it says from the beginning of the Bible, like our destination or our identity, everything was first to be healed in him, you know. So like maybe in that time you couldn't see healing the same way that we see it now, and like it looked different like in that moment, you know, like God is sending you, I don't know, to go to China to like preach whatever, but before that you can just not go prepare, you know, like your heart cannot be like, I don't know, have all this pain and now have to talk to these people that are going through the same but never received that first. And I think that was so key for Moses to go through all of these and have maybe those 40 years like first be alone with God, and now bringing that healing, bringing that love back to him that he was missing because he never had it. Maybe he had a family kind of, but it was never his real family, you know. And we talk about adoption or whatever and all of that, but I think it's so important to see that before any calling or anything great that you're gonna do in your life or I'm gonna do or anything, that God prepares something first, you know. And that was for your heart to be right with him first, you know. You're not meant to like do great things. Your heart was always, your greatest thing is to have your heart right with God. And that's, and that time again was different. But now if you put in these days language or anything, I think that's so key and important, and that's the root of everything. And I can see it in his obedience as well, you know, because like of course he's a human being, especially he's a man, and like the man image has been so broken for so long since the beginning everything happened. So of course there was a lot of things he needed to like, I think those 40 years are so important, and we don't see it as an important as we see it today, like, oh God, but I'm ready to do this. But God is like, no, there's still time, you know, like God is not rushed with time. Like we can see it, like it took 40 years and he was like, I'm still providing for you every single day, you know. Takes 40 days, takes 40 years, takes 100 years, like that's the time that God prepared, you know. And maybe we don't see it now. Like maybe it was always meant to be 40 years, because they needed to learn, and that's maybe our hearts. Like 40 years, it seems like a lot, but like not really. Like if you think about it, they go so fast. We're just talking about the last podcast. Like it's a 2024 already. Like I just remember when I was 18, you know, like it just goes so fast. But I think it's so like beautiful to see that as a human being, and like as we were saying before, that he, since the beginning, there was a fingerprint of God in his life, and throughout the whole process, it's the same with us, you know, like we can identify with him, that maybe our life doesn't look like Moses, you know, without delivering the whole, like, people of Israel, everything, but we do have the fingerprint of God in our life, and we are, like, maybe our testimonies for what that person, and for example, I don't mind, it's my family, or yours is your, like, disciples, or like yours is like anything, you know, but that importance of God since the beginning, and that we cannot forget the beginning, you know. I think that's why and Moses, I don't know how old he was till he killed that person, or like whatever he did, but whatever we did, like God still used it. And it was meant to happen, even though we say like it wasn't meant to happen, like God did not I don't think he wanted for him to bad things to happen, or for him to kill people, but I think he wanted to like turn that back on, turn that back.
Turn that upside down.
Thank you.
Sure.
I couldn't find the phrase.
And not just for Moses' life, but also for everybody who was following him. I think sometimes we look at Moses and we think like, oh yeah, like if God used Moses, a man who was like this, then also how can he use me? But like, let's remember also like the status quo, and like the what was like acceptable and what was unacceptable. You know, not only did he kill a man, not only was he like no longer considered a Jew because he wasn't brought up as a Jew, he lived in the house of Pharaoh, so now he was an Egyptian, but then he was also in exile, like because of himself. And then not only that, but then he comes with a woman who he is now married to, who's from a complete different tribe. Like back in the day, that was a big no-no. That was even bigger, you know. So for the people of Israel as well, to just be met with this as the man who's going to deliver us from Egypt, who really does not fit any of the things that we've heard, even though we haven't heard for the last 400 years the voice of God, but it does not fit with any of the idealisms or the things that we have been working our way through. We would think it was a rabbi, we would think it was, you know, all these different things. They really needed to trust God. They really needed to trust God in Moses. But everything about him was a red flag. And I think many times, I think we overlook that because we read the story of Moses and we think God's going to send a Moses who is not very well equipped. But we don't see the fact that also he, you know, wasn't like, I don't know. I think in today's day, it might be kind of different. But for example, there's this guy that I follow on Instagram, Ross Johnston, I think his name is. But God is really using him to bring a huge like new wave of like freedom and people to God, and like a whole new Jesus revival in the States, but especially with the LGBT community. And it turns out that this guy never grew up in church. He did not grow up as a Christian, and in fact he is a product of insemination. Insemination, thank you. Like he has 2 mums. Right? And you know, and so in many ways, like if we look at, I don't know, I'm using this example because it's something that's a bit more current, I think, something a bit more that we can reflect today. But if we look at him, you know, we're like, whoa, what a crazy testimony. But if I was supposed to put myself under his leadership, there's a lot of things that perhaps will be like a huge red flag.
But before the fruit. Because now he is, like you said, really big on Instagram, and you're seeing him everywhere, and you're like, wow, the fruit, I want to follow that guy because he's got fruit. But Moses didn't have fruit yet.
Oh, exactly. He didn't have anything.
Imagine having to follow this guy when he didn't have fruit yet.
Exactly.
Oof.
Yeah.
The only thing you know is that apparently he's heard the voice of God. But how could it be that he heard the voice of God that we haven't heard for the last 400 years? And this guy who has is a murderer,
or like, why didn't God use anyone else?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like, it's like, would we follow in the same way? Would we also have enough faith and trust? Perhaps even not just God, like thankfully, like what you said, you know, now we have the Holy Spirit. So thankfully we have our own discernment, and we we have that, and sometimes we really don't dig into that as much as we should. But would we also like follow in those same footsteps without firstly seeing the fruit, you know? And I think that's also a huge reflection, especially as YWAMers. I think many times, especially now as missionaries, we go to like the big bases, or we go to the ministries that have things that I want to invest, but how many of us are ready to like go and like pioneer a base that's not going to take off for another 40 years?
Yeah.
You know, and it's going to keep receiving persecution. I don't know that I want to, but am I willing to?
I think as well, like, we have the extremes in YWAM, if we're going to use that as an example. One extreme is that we follow blindly.
Yeah.
And the other extreme is that we look for big fruit, like, oh, I want to follow the big leader, you know, or the person who's famous or whatever. Not only in YWAM, this is also in Christian context, you know. And I think what you just said is so important, like in this generation or this time in life, not only this generation, like Gen Z, like people who are living right now. That's what I mean by this generation. If you are alive, this is for you, which is,
you're in this generation,
which is to operate in discernment, you know, like we forget about it. We forget about discernment. We forget about our own capacity to recognize, like, if there's something not good, something that is a red flag, you know, not so that I look at Moses and I'm like, red flag, because according to my logic, but no, listening also to the spirit within me. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I just want to touch on that before we keep going, because I don't think it's like, I think there's wisdom in also not following blindly. But also not looking for the red flags.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? There has to be a middle point where it's like, there are some red flags, but I feel God saying something. We were talking about this the other day in the kitchen here in Kaleo, about how there's movements of Christian bodies that are like, they can be kind of mystical and they can be kind of weird, you know? And they'll, like, I don't know, use like a cane to, like, I don't know, people like do prophetic acts that are really mystical. And when we were talking about, like, oh, that's so weird, or that's so this and that, or we were saying, like, oh, I don't know if that's what they felt God calling them to, it's fine. But my point is, like, in case we look at like prophecies or things, ways that, like, I don't know, when Moses said, God, prove to me that you're real, make this stick a snake, and God did it. Yeah. Like, in case that was today, I don't know, I'd be like, that looks like something a little demonic. Like, he's so operating with spirits, you know? And how important it is to operate in discernment so that we can walk in the miracles and in, like, the supernatural of God, you know? Because that's what this whole story is about. Before the Holy Spirit, before, I don't know, the upper room where they were drunk on the Spirit and whatever. Before all of that, like, the way Moses lived was in the supernatural. Yeah. In a way of communicating with God and doing what he said, you know? And I think we miss out on that because of our own reasoning and our own logic and our own criteria. Either you have too many red flags, so I don't follow you, or I follow blindly without operating in my own connection to God. Both of those things are dangerous and not at all what Moses is reflecting in his story. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, I don't know. It's my 2 cents.
I think also Moses, like, I don't know. I agree with what we're saying about, like, it being like him having red flags in the way that, like, there were a lot of things that you look at Moses and you're like, how the heck did God use that, you know? Or like, and where he came from in his past, and like his stutter and all these things, you know? And you're like, oh gosh. But at the same time, like, I don't know, like, you look at Moses and you're like, at the same time, he did such incredible things, you know? And I think kind of like similar to what you're saying about discernment, I think there was something obviously that God saw in him that was like innately pure and good, you know? I think also at some point in the Bible, I think it's in Numbers 20 or something, you can fact check me, they say that Moses was like the most humble man on the face of the earth, you know? And it's like, I'm not trying to say that like he didn't have his problems, you know, for sure he did. But at the same time, this man was so humble, you know, was leading these people and was following God and being obedient. And of course, you know, he struck the rock and didn't eventually like, didn't make it into the promised land. He did see it, which I think is something that we also forget a lot of the times, you know, that he actually did see it, you know, maybe he didn't step foot in it, but I think that was also like a really incredible experience for him.
I think he also knew. I think like he probably, like, in his personal relationship with God, I think also God must have prepared him for like knowing that's not your promise. Your promise is that I will be with you. And God was with him from the beginning. You know, from the beginning, he will be with you. Because that was literally like when he was in front of the burning bush was like, but like, you know, how, like, who am I? What would I say? Who is sending me? You know, I am, like I am is with you, you know? And that was the truth. And so, like, I think for him to be able to see it was part of, like, God saying, like, not only was I with you, but I was with them, you know?
Yeah.
But it's also for them, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that was enough for Moses. And I think sometimes we, like, belittle things and we're like, but we want to be in the glory of that, you know? But actually, like, I think for Moses, that was enough. One, that God was with him, but two, that even that God would give him the opportunity to even see, like, that they actually did get there, you know? And that's crazy that sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I look at some of my leaders and I think, like, wow, they are so humble. But I think what makes me see that they are so humble is that their victory is actually in my victory, you know? And sometimes I think I look at, like, I compare myself with some people,
right?
And or like I look at some people and I'm like, they are awful, they're bad, they're like whatever. Why can't you like you know, punish them or whatever? But they take delight in when they make a small progress, you know, because they have that heart of a father, that heart of a mother, you know. And I think Moses had that too, you know. It's something that for sure he worked through the 40 years before and the 40 years after, for sure. But it's something that that he had, and so that him getting to see the promised land was also him like also like being like content with God for his children, for also the future generations, for the fact that God's promise had been sealed and that he got to share in that, you know. And I think sometimes we don't look at it in that way. But also, like, I think what you were saying before, I can't remember who was saying it, but like, yes, he was such a humble man. Yes, he was so amazing. Yes, I'm sure he rejoiced, like, as he saw the promised land and didn't get into it, perhaps. But also, he was a man that struggled. Like, he fought with God. He wrestled with God. He said, no, God, not me, you know? Like, and so, like we see... a couple times. Yeah, like, we see him being this man who's, like, content and happy, perhaps. Didn't even get there, but, like, how humble, because he didn't even get to the promised land. He had to walk for 80 years total in the desert with people who hated him, people who backstabbed him, people who also related to him. Yeah. But also, he complained. But also, he, like fought God, but also he resisted God. Like, it wasn't just the people. It was, and I think sometimes I look at it and I'm like the people that were following Moses, you know, like, awful. God, send me better people. But what about me? Because Moses was also, like, part of the reason why they were in the desert as well for a while, you know. Like, he also fought against God. He also resisted so many different things. But God's mercy still was extended even to him. And you can see that by the fact that he got to see the promised land even though he didn't get there, you know. And I think that's so powerful, super powerful. I don't know, at least for me.
Yeah, I think that's when you realize that God is the one who knows the heart at the end of the day. And I think, like, when you follow someone, like, probably people were like, I don't know why I'm following you, but if he had that authority that came straight from God, like, you hear to the authority, you know that, like, you can't escape from it because you, like, there's something in you that moves. And maybe they didn't have the Spirit, like the Holy Spirit in that time, but there was something that maybe there was, like, all the red flags. Maybe there was 99 red flags, but there was one that maybe was the strongest one. That was the authority that came from God that cannot be moved from anything, you know. And that, I think that's why, like, Moses was able to stay where he was, and, like, people were able to listen to him because God knew his heart beyond, like, he made all the mistakes, beyond, like, he did amazing things, beyond the good and the bad. I think, like, God just knew his heart, like, from the beginning since the end, like, with the promises, without promises, with things being fulfilled or not, like, he just knew his heart. And I think that's why he was the first and only one to believe in him since the beginning, because that was his identity. That was all of our identities, you know. He's the only one who really knows our heart. And I think that's why he's the only one who fights for us. Like, I know there's a lot of people that fight for us, but he's the only one who will remain from before everything till, like, the end of everything. And I think that's, like, beautiful to know that, like, beyond what humans can see, beyond what we can see in people, in our leaders, in anyone, like, God knows the heart, you know. Like, things are hidden, they're not hidden stuff, our destiny, not destiny, identity, whatever you want to call it. Calling, not calling, greatest things, I don't know. But
I think something I find really beautiful about Moses, different topic, is that he had such a capacity to love. Like, yeah, he did complain with God, and he like also was on like the top of a mountain writing on a tablet of stone all these things that God's saying, and then he goes downstairs and throws them all on the ground. Goes down the mountain. Like, sure, he had his moments of frustration, but like, I'm so sorry, these Israelites were terrible.
Yeah,
They were terrible. Like, I don't know. I have like the patience, like my patience is so small, especially in comparison to Moses. Like, I don't know, somebody complains against me or somebody has a bad attitude and I'm like, forget it with this person. Like 5 minutes of bad attitude and I'm like, you know what, I'm done with them, you know? And yet he endured so much for no benefit of his own. Like, it was all for God's glory, but at the same time, like, he just had such a capacity to love, because the only way to have patience the way that he did, the only way to keep on leading people, the only way to like deal with all the discouragement and the complaints and the frustration that he had was that he renewed his love with God for those people all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think I could have done it, to be honest. I would have been like, oh, you guys don't want to go? You want to go back to Egypt? You want to die there? Bye.
Go.
There's the door. It's over there. Like,
Bye.
see you later, you know? And yet he kept on fighting for them. Also sometimes to God. When God wanted to be like, all right, I'm done. He was like arguing with God to defend them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he had this crazy capacity to love. Like, it's something I want to learn from. I want to learn from like his patience and his love, because it's at such a high level, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Go Moses.
Yeah.
Moses was a G. Moses was the original G. And why God chose him, I don't know. I would like to find out when I get to heaven.
But such a strategy.
But yeah.
Like from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like baby in a basket, headed back to his mom, the only boy baby to live, because they're killing all the boys.
Yeah. I think also God, in a lot of ways, he loves a little drama stories. God, no, but really, like, he loves to like take some crazy freaking experience and turn it right around.
Exactly.
You know, like he loves doing that. You look at, I mean, any character in the Bible, literally. You know,
literally.
like Paul is a great example. You know, like from 180-degree turn. You know, and God loves doing that.
Yeah.
He loves doing that. You know, like Jesus born in a manger. You know,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah.
it's also like a classic example, but it's so true.
Yeah.
He loves taking like impossible situations and making them for his good, you know, and bringing so much glory out of it, you know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Jesus in a manger, Moses in a basket.
Moses in a basket, Paul
All
on
these
the road.
babies, you know.
Paul went blind. Maybe that's who you're thinking of.
Yeah, I think you're combining this.
I'm pretty sure he went blind for like 3 days.
Moses?
I can look it up.
Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe not blind, but he was like
In shock.
Yeah.
Was it when he went up Mount Sinai? After the bush?
I'm probably mixing a story because I always do this.
I think it might have been that, because then somewhere it says something about his wife was the one who was like, because he still didn't. I can't remember.
Yeah, maybe it is Paul.
Let's see. What does AI say?
So far, it says he did not lose his eyesight in his old age.
So
it's like,
yeah, I don't think that happened.
Sorry, I lied, people.
No, it's okay.
But maybe he was like blinded.
Yeah.
Like in
For
the,
sure,
like,
he like was
taken
up on the
aback.
mountain, and the like God's presence was so strong on his face that he had to cover his face
Yeah.
because he
Yeah,
would like
maybe,
blind
yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
That makes a lot of sense.
We're giving you the benefit of the doubt.
I'm gonna do a study after this.
No, but yeah, there's so much. I think the whole point of this as well is like to kind of like, I think Maddie touched on it as well. Like, there's so much in the context that we just read or like we just watch. Like, I watched blindly as a child and even as an adult. There's so many things that we just take as they are, but we don't know the why. And like, we should want to find out the whys. You know, we should want to find out like a little bit more about the backstory. You know, like we should, like, even like when it comes to like I don't know, Pharaoh being okay, like what you said about like Pharaoh being okay with the fact that the baby like was one of the babies that was supposed to be killed because he knew that baby looked Jewish. Like, I'm pretty sure that like you knew that was a Jewish baby. Like, I'm sorry, but you know, like not talking about anything like, you know, bad or whatever, but you get the point. Like it's obvious, especially back then, like it was very obvious. These are the, you know, if nowadays we see that clear difference between like, you know, this person's black, this person's white, back then it was also like a thing about like race in the same way, you know, there's many things that have continued. So why then, like what was like over him, what was cast over him, what did the daughter say even, you know, so many things that I think when we understand like also the context of not only what was happening but also like the severity in a sense of the situation, that allows us to understand the intensity of God's power in the midst of that as well, you know, that brings even a greater breakthrough, you know, like thinking about that small piece of information, the fact that Moses was kept hidden for about at least 3 years while he was being nursed, like that's huge, you know, but we don't know that because we don't know that context. And just even in those 3 years, like the covering of God, you know, and I think that can even be encouraging for some of us who are going through situations where we feel like God's hand and covering isn't there, but it's only when we look back at that time and we can actually see as well, looking at the context and the reality, like, wow, God was with me. God is with me, you know? So yeah, I don't know. I think it's, if this hopefully encourages you to kind of dive deeper, not just into Moses' life, but into anyone. And I think kind of like, as we talked, you know, there's good, there's bad, there's ugly, but nonetheless, like there is a very clear evidence, very wild, clear evidence that God used this situation that was so unconventional, so unrealistic, and he made something so amazing, and actually he brought so much freedom. And I think that gives us hope also for all the craziness that we're seeing around the world as well. If God did it before, he can do it again, and God will continue to do it again. And he's going to continue to raise up people who don't see fit and don't seem like the best, but God's going to make a way. He did it, and he will continue to do it because that's who God is.
Amen.
Amen. Woo.
On that
Pick it up and preach.
on that note, thank you for joining this episode. We hope you enjoyed yourselves. I think we did.
Yeah.
I think it was
I
good.
love the Bible.
There's so much more we can say.
There's
though.
so much more.
Yeah.
But I think we'll keep it to this point because our phones probably can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
But anyways, we'll see you in the next episode. So stay tuned.
Bye.